Prince William has had a very challenging and emotionally exhausting few weeks, and from everything sources are saying, is only going to get worse from here. There is a story developing at the Balmoral Estate right now that honestly feels like it has been building for decades. It is a confrontation that many inside the palace walls knew was inevitable, but no one expected it to happen with this level of speed and clinical precision. At the center of this storm is the woman who systematically dismantled a royal marriage, the woman who spent years engineering her rise to the throne, and the consequence of her long-term ambitions now catching up with her family. For the past few days, the atmosphere behind the scenes has been described as incredibly tense, driven by an institutional action that has left courtiers stunned. The turning point arrived not with a public announcement, but with a highly confidential meeting involving senior royal lawyers that led to a definitive executive action. Sources say this entire crisis was cemented during a single communication that lasted less than 10 minutes. Short, precise, and according to sources. The kind of conversation someone has when they have already made the decision and are simply delivering the final verdict. Lawyers have now confirmed the decision. King Charles is ultimately taking control of the Balmoral Estate arrangements, specifically targeting the future access and privileges of Camilla's son, Tom Parker Bowles. Sources describe the move as a sweeping reassessment of who belongs within the inner sanctuary of the monarchy, and who is being quietly transitioned out. According to sources, this decision has sent shockwaves through Camilla's immediate family network, leaving them to realize that the shield they relied on for so long is beginning to fracture. Sources suggest that that short, definitive call was not an isolated incident, but rather the first move in something much bigger. A grand strategy designed to reshape the royal landscape permanently. What exactly transpired in that legal briefing that has left the Queen Consort's circle completely isolated? To understand why this is happening now, we have to look closely at Prince William and why he is choosing this specific moment to assert his authority. For years, William remained silent, playing the part of the dutiful son and the supportive heir, suppressing his private feelings for the sake of institutional stability. But sources suggest his personal motivation has shifted from survival to something far more profound. A deep-seated desire for justice, institutional duty, and the absolute protection of his mother's legacy. He is no longer the grieving teenager forced to walk behind a coffin while the world watched. He is the future king, and he is fiercely sympathetic to the memory of the woman who was pushed out to make way for another. Now, the context has changed, and Camilla can no longer rely on the slow, careful accumulation of power she enjoyed over the last 2 decades. For years, she was the woman who spent millions on public relations. The woman who carefully managed her image to transition from the most disliked person in Britain to the Queen Consort. She built a fortress of influence, bringing her own children, particularly her son Tom Parker Bowles, into the periphery of royal life, granting them access to estates like Balmoral and allowing them to enjoy the prestige of the crown without any of the constitutional responsibilities. So why now? Why, after all these years of quiet acceptance, has the situation suddenly reversed? Sources say the answer has 2 parts, and you need both of them to understand what is actually going on here. The first part of the answer lies in the fact that the hero's institutional position has fundamentally changed. Prince William now controls billions of dollars in assets through the Duchy of Cornwall and holds immense sway over the broader administration of the royal estates. All of it is under his direct influence or rapidly heading toward his absolute control. No consultation is required. No approval is needed from anyone else when it comes to the long-term planning of the family's legacy. A concrete example of this power being utilized occurred recently behind closed doors. The moment William took over his advanced institutional responsibilities, certain names associated with Camilla's extended family stopped appearing on official guest lists and internal financial allocations for estate privileges. There was no public dispute, no dramatic press statement. They were just gone. That decision sent a message that didn't need any translation. Royal commentators picked up on it immediately and noted it was causing significant ripples inside the palace. This was not a temporary logistical change, it was a structural boundary being erected. Sources suggest that Catherine approved completely of this direction. Her validation of these actions through the lens of someone with immense standing and future responsibility has given William an unshakable foundation. Together they are looking toward the future. And that future does not include a shared spotlight with those who gained access through the back door of royal history. The second part of the answer is anchored deeply to historical tragedy. August 31st, 1997 will soon mark 30 years since the tragedy happened in Paris. 30 years since a young prince had to walk behind his mother's coffin in front of the entire world. Enduring unspeakable grief under the cold glare of global television cameras, he is now 44 years old, a husband, a father of 3 future heirs. And in his entire period of public life, he has never once made a direct, aggressive public statement connecting his feelings about Camilla to his feelings about what his mother went through. He didn't need to. His actions have been making that statement consistently for years. Sources say William reached a point where he was done allowing institutional loyalty to override private conviction. Done watching his mother's memory be overshadowed by the continuous elevation of the woman who caused her so much pain. Furthermore, the palace is dealing with a hidden asset that is making certain people inside Buckingham Palace genuinely nervous. There is a secure room at Windsor Castle called the Royal Archives. It is a place of absolute restriction. No tourists, no documentary crews, no public access whatsoever. What it contains is the unfiltered, unedited, privately recorded history of the British royal family. Letters, diaries, internal correspondence, the written record of what was actually happening inside the institution during the most turbulent decades of the 20th century. What exactly is in those archives that certain people allegedly do not want surfacing right now? The broad strokes are already public knowledge, the public separations, the leaked tapes, the high-profile media interviews. All of that is documented, analyzed, and debated in the public square. What sources suggest is in those archives goes far beyond the broad strokes. It is the specificity, the private, contemporaneous written record of who knew what. When they knew it, who facilitated the breakdown of the Prince and Princess of Wales's marriage, and how institutional power was weaponized to protect the affair at the expense of Diana. William has access to these records, and his knowledge of their contents is guiding his current stance. As a result, Camilla's situation is rapidly deteriorating, and William has been using his administrative influence with a precision that people inside her inner circle are only now fully appreciating. A distinct pattern of removal has begun to emerge. Access to crown events, proximity to official royal occasions, and invitations that had previously been extended to members of Camilla's wider circle, including her son Tom, had been quietly withdrawn. High-profile appearances where her family members had expected to be present have been restructured without any formal explanation. It is a masterclass in bureaucratic isolation. It's nothing that generates a massive, explosive headline on its own. But everything adds up to something unmistakable when you step back and look at the full picture. This stands in stark contrast to the symbolic power Camilla has tried to project. When she walked into Westminster Abbey during the coronation, wearing the historic robes and the modified crown, it was a statement. A carefully chosen signal to the world that she had achieved the ultimate status. But that crown will one day sit on William's head, or the crown of the Queen Consort will belong to Catherine. When that happens, the symbolic transfer will be so total and so unmistakable that everything Camilla's coronation moment represented will effectively be overwritten. The long-term shift is also visible in patronage reallocations. When Queen Elizabeth passed away, hundreds of royal patronages became vacant. The redistribution of those patronages among working royals has been ongoing, and sources suggest William has allegedly been involved in certain key decisions in ways that have quietly shaped that redistribution, ensuring the focus remains squarely on the core lineage of the monarchy, effectively bypassing Camilla's preferred networks. The personal isolation is hitting closer to home as well. Camilla recently sold Ray Mill House, her private property. There was no grand press release, no lifestyle magazine feature, no carefully managed announcement, just a property that appeared on the market and disappeared from her portfolio. People do not sell their personal sanctuaries casually. They do not part with the one place that belongs entirely to them unless something, a Maziki, has shifted fundamentally in how they see their own future. Right now, she moves through multiple royal residences like Balmoral and Sandringham as a matter of course, because Charles is king. But that picture changes completely when the inevitable transition of the crown occurs. Properties pass directly to William. Buckingham Palace and the grandest estates become William's primary residences and domain. Sources suggest her likely inheritance and future accommodation options consist of smaller estates. It's valued at several million. Significant assets by any normal measure, but completely inadequate as a substitute for the majestic positions she currently occupies. The stark reality is overwhelming. She would go from being the queen consort with the full weight and majesty of the monarchy behind her to a secondary role, living in designated houses at the absolute discretion of a man who grew up watching what she did to his mother. The dismantling of the extended family network is already visible. Staff members associated with her personal circle have seen their roles diminished, and her son's access to prominent royal spaces is allegedly finished. The family's broader proximity to crown events is quietly narrowing to the point of exclusion. Sources suggest William is dismantling it piece by piece with a patience and thoroughness that speaks to genuine, long-term intent rather than temporary frustration. He is clearing the deck for his own reign, ensuring that the boundaries between the legitimate royal line and those who entered via a controversial second marriage are permanently enforced. Adding to this tension is a complicating factor regarding past associations. When certain names appear in internal palace documentation or external reports, even without any evidence of criminal wrongdoing, the institutional damage is real and documented. Sources suggest William has made his position completely clear to the king. The expectation is simple: distance the monarchy from non-essential, controversial figures publicly and permanently, or accept the structural consequences. Camilla has reportedly not fully complied with this rigid outlook. She views ending long-standing family privileges or cutting off her son's access as both personally impossible and fundamentally unfair. William, however, views her continued insistence on their inclusion as evidence of exactly the kind of judgment failure that justifies his deep concerns about her influence. This has placed King Charles in an agonizing position. He made a phone call to William in recent months that sources describe as one of the most difficult conversations between the father and son in decades. It was not an angry call, not accusatory, but quiet, heavy, and deeply pained. The king is navigating significant health challenges while maintaining his public duties with genuine discipline. But discipline is not the same as absolute strength. He is facing an impossible choice. Protecting Camilla's family's total access would mean telling William to restore privileges that the future king has already decided to revoke. William would not comply, and Charles knows it. It would mean trying to overrule his heir and causing a constitutional rift that the monarchy cannot afford. The moral bind is the heaviest burden of all. Charles is the man who conducted the historic affair that Diana described in terms of profound personal devastation. He is the reason that historic grief exists within his children. How do you argue against your son's protective instincts over his mother's memory when you are the very reason that grief exists in the first place? You cannot. There is a version of the story that looks like simple revenge, narrative where William and Catherine are systematically dismantling everything. Camilla built his payback for what she did to Diana, but there is another version that looks like something much more considered, much more constitutional, and far more lasting than revenge. Sources suggest this second version is closer to the truth. Simple revenge would look like a public humiliation, a dramatic stripping of titles and a single, explosive moment designed for tabloid headlines. That is not what sources describe William as building. This is not an emotional outburst. It is a quiet, permanent realignment of the institution itself. Think about what Diana actually stood for, not the manufactured fairy tale image, but the real, raw substance of what she did during her time on Earth. She touched the hands of AIDS patients when the establishment was still treating the disease as something shameful and terrifying. She walked through active minefields to make a profound political point about weapons killing innocent civilians. She sat with homeless people on the streets, looked them directly in the eye, and treated them as fully human in a way that senior royals simply were not supposed to do at the time. She did all of this against the active cold resistance of an institution that found her emotional directness threatening and her immense popularity destabilizing. In the end, history showed she was right about all of it. The institution was wrong. Now her son is preparing to run that institution, sources suggest. William's modernization agenda is not simply a matter of good management practice or corporate restructuring. It is Diana's spirit expressed institutionally. The emotional intelligence she was told was inappropriate for a royal is now being prioritized. The public accountability she was told was dangerous is being integrated. The genuine human connection she was told was beneath the dignity of a senior royal is allegedly being built directly into the very architecture of the monarchy William is constructing for the modern era. Catherine's contribution runs completely parallel to this mission. Her years of quiet, genuinely impactful work in early childhood development represent a living argument against performative, old-fashioned royalty. It is the exact argument Diana made and paid everything to establish. Here's what sources suggest Camilla is slowly and painfully coming to understand as the lawyers confirm these estate decisions. She won the short-term battle. She got the man. She got the title of queen. She got the coronation, the historic tiara, and the seat beside the king. But the long-term war was never about Charles. It was about Diana and what Diana represented, and whether the institution she tried to change would eventually become something worthy of the price she ultimately paid. William and Catherine are allegedly building that institution now. Not for the sake of petty revenge, but for the enduring legacy of Diana. Camilla has no counter-strategy for that. You cannot argue against a legacy that has captured the hearts of generations. You cannot litigate a son's grief. You cannot outmaneuver a future king who watched his mother suffer and spent decades deciding quietly, calmly and deliberately what to do about it when the power finally shifted into his hands. Diana never got to see what this monarchy could become under her lineage. Her story ended in a dark Paris tunnel, leaving 2 boys without a mother and a royal family that barely lowered its flag to acknowledge the loss. But sources suggest something is happening inside that palace right now that she never lived to see. Her son moving forward quietly and permanently, reshaping everything Camilla built into something Diana would have recognized entirely as her own. Not revenge, something far better than revenge. Legacy. And that, more than any property dispute, Balmoral Estate decision, or symbolic tiara, is what sources describe as Camilla's darkest reality in decades.